So, thank you very much. Thank you to our hosts for hosting this arrangement, and thank you for the opportunity to try to define cooperation opportunities between the Baltic countries and the Nordic Council of Ministers and the Nordic Energy Research. I am CEO for the Nordic Energy Research. Early on, I have worked for the Danish Ministry of Energy. I'm a Dane for many years, and I also worked for 8 years as a director in the International Energy Agency in Paris. So this is my background, and what I would like to show you is, and it will take something like 20-25 minutes. I think the slides my staff members have made are so exciting that you will not feel that it is a long presentation. But if you feel that, then it is because I am boring. The slides are very good, so look at them. And I would also like to repeat what I said to the minister, that there could be an extra reason to listen, because if you are interested in this kind of scenario building, then we would be happy to assist and probably find a way of funding that we made a similar exercise, focusing on the Baltic countries, but of course focusing on the links between the Baltic countries and the Nordic countries. Some of the links are already here. Briefly, the first part, the first slide is telling us about the Nordic energy mix, the energy resources. And biomass and waste is very important for the Nordic countries. And I think it would be it for Lithuania, is probably already, but could continue to be developed in that way. Hydropower, we heard from the minister that you don't have much hydropower. That is the same, that is also the case, as you can see, for Denmark. We have absolutely no hydropower. The highest mountain in Denmark is below than 200 meters high. No hydropower. And then we have geothermal in Iceland only. And we have wind and solar increasing probably, and then we have nuclear to some extent, and then the rest is then fossil fuels. So that is still a significant proportion of the energy supply in the Nordic countries. And this study, this scenario we have built, is aiming at to describe how we can reduce the content of fossil fuels, how we can reduce the carbonization of the energy, how we can reduce the carbon emissions from the energy sector down to the joint target of 85, that it should be reduced with 85% compared with what it was in 1990. And this study is dealing with how we can do that in the most cost-effective way, and at the same time maintain economic growth and energy security of supply. So if we look at renewable electricity share in our countries, then we have Sweden here, we have Latvia here, we have Denmark. Latvia has more than Denmark. We have Finland, we have Lithuania, and we have Estonia here. And next slide is telling us about the carbon intensity of electricity in our countries, and Estonia, Denmark, Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Lithuania about the same level as Denmark. And if we then look at the situation in the Nordic countries, then this is a global slide here showing us that here is the average carbon intensity of electricity measured in grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. So this is now about 500 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. What IEA is telling us is that if we should achieve the 2-degree target, then the world in average must move down this curve. And that looks very ambitious, because it, for instance, means that in 2045, we should be down at 50 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. The amazing thing is that the Nordic countries are already here, not in 2040, but in 2013. And that is why we can claim that in relation to global carbon intensity, the Nordic countries are 30 years ahead on where the world should be. And that is, we are proud of that. The minister was proud of the results in Lithuania. We are proud of this. And, but there's still no room for complacency, because electricity and heat is only covering 30% of the entire carbon emissions from energy sector. The rest is transport and industry and others. And in these fields, we are not much better than the rest of the world. So we have still a serious challenge facing us. The main tools for how we have achieved what we have achieved in electricity markets are lined up here. Maybe I should mention energy efficiency first. The minister also put a lot of emphasis on that. And so we think this is a precondition for achieving all the results we need to achieve, including the results we have achieved. There's been some coordination of the energy policies, but all the Nordic countries have their own energy policy. There's coordination in the European Union, and there's also some coordination among the Nordic countries. A very important factor is the grid connections. There's also now grid connections between the Nordic countries and the Baltic countries, but they are very tight and well-developed grid connections between the Nordic countries. The first one was built as early as in 1915, 101 year ago. We have established a joint electricity market, which is, according to the European Union, the best working electricity market in the entire Union. And we have succeeded to have enhanced flexibility. And flexibility is a word I will use many times, because that is the key for the Nordic countries to being able to integrate more and more intermittent, variable, renewable energy in our electricity system. We couldn't do that if we didn't have the flexibility from the other sources. So what we have succeeded to do is that even when intermittent renewable energy is playing together with thermal energy, coal-fired or gas-fired power plants, then we have succeeded to make those very flexible, so we can ramp up and down the production so that it fits into when the wind is not blowing or if there's no water in the hydropower plants. This is an important factor as well. And then, as I said, energy efficiency is maybe the most important and over again highlighted as the most cost-effective way to achieve our triple targets of economic growth, energy security, and environmental sustainability. So this is how the Nordic countries have succeeded to decouple from continued growth in GDP and CO2 emissions. There's of course a question of a carbon footprint in other countries, but we have looked into this, and this is actually taking into account the carbon footprints in other countries. So what the Nordic energy technology perspectives is looking at is first of all the so-called Nordic carbon neutral scenario. So that means that this is the target for the development which is common for the Nordic countries. This is an average of the ambitions of the Nordic countries, which ends up in having reduced with 85% the carbon emissions we had in 1990. So the target is to achieve this reduction with 85%, and what this publication is doing is to investigate what is the most cost-effective way to do that. So, and that is built by methodology developed by the Nordic countries together with the International Energy Agency, and it is a similar exercise we might make in the Baltic countries. So the challenges we are dealing with are coming in 4 different sectors. Although we have done a lot in electricity, then there's still a lot to do, in particular in heat. A lot of the carbon you saw in Denmark and in Finland, where you still saw fossil fuels, that is due to the heating sector, and also some power plants still are fueled by fossil fuels. In transportation, there's a huge potential, and that is a huge challenge. I will return to that. And so is industry. In buildings themselves, we have done a lot, but in relation to electricity and heat to buildings, there's still a lot of things to do. So this is a picture of the publication. Everybody can have a copy. We have brought a number of copies, and it can be downloaded from our homepage. This study is made in a cooperation between my organization, Nordic Energy Research, and my earlier organization, the International Energy Agency. And here are the scientific institutions which we have worked together with from all the Baltic, or all the Nordic countries. And as you can see, none of those have any commercial or political interests in what is going on here. This is an unbiased, neutral scenario, only focusing on what is the most cost-effective way to achieve the political targets. So electricity and heat, here is still a lot to do. And this is maybe the main purpose, to have a flexible electricity production, and that means that we should be able to link it together with demand side management, to more utilization of electricity in industry, more utilization of electricity in transportation, and also possibility to convert electricity to gas fuel, to have much more interconnection, grid connections with other countries, so to balance out if there is a little lower production of intermittent renewable energy in the Nordic areas, then to balance it out with links to other countries. Again here, heat interaction with heat, with combined heat and power, storing electricity as heat is also an important flexibility option. And here in a little more detail, flexible generation of hydropower and thermal, so that is sufficiently flexible could fit into if there is no sufficient production of electricity from wind or from solar. District heating, again, the interaction between power and heat in the system is an important flexibility measure. As I said, demand response in industry and buildings, and we have talked a lot about that today, on what is going on in the Baltic countries on that. And we foresee a need and a benefit and a good payback for continuing to strengthen the grid connections between the Nordic countries themselves and between the Nordic countries and countries outside. This is what the electricity trade is looking today, and we should have one here from Sweden to the Baltic countries as well here, but that might not have been started in 2015. But this is a picture of the electricity trade as it was in 2015. There's a lot of internal trades in Sweden, for instance, but also trades Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, even Russia, Finland, Estonia, and links to Poland, the Netherlands, and to Germany. And then now what the models are showing us, that if we should stay at the most cost-effective road forward, what would the electricity trade then look like in 2050? And you have that picture here. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Germany, Netherlands, Great Britain. And strongly increased levels of trade between the countries involved. When I visited Iceland 2 days ago, we told Iceland that we would very much like to integrate Iceland in that. And they are seriously considering to build a cable between Iceland and Scotland. And if they did that, then we could, via the link to United Kingdom, also be linked with Iceland. But that is not the case yet. It might be later on. And then the question is this unrealistically ambitious? The fact is that already now these connections, these interconnections are more or less decided. So that it's more or less decided in the European Union and in the Nordic countries that this is how the grid will look in 2030. So we are already on the way to this comprehensive system of interconnections. This is how the modeling, again with the purpose of finding the most cost-effective way to achieve the 85% reduction target, what that looks like. And this is what how the composition of sources, of energy sources, will look in 2050. And as you can see here is 2013, here's 2050. There's not much difference taking place in the contribution from hydro. And the same is the case for biomass, about the same contribution from biomass. So what is reduced is nuclear and fossil fuels. And what is increased is wind and then a little solar on the top of it. So that is, as the models and the International Energy Agency and we in the Nordic Research are assessing it, this will be the most cost-effective way to have our energy mix in 2050. And this is the similar picture in district heat generation, where you can see a little the same. Oil is being reduced, coal is being reduced, oil, natural gas, and biomass and waste about the same level. Geothermal, this is mostly in Iceland, same level. And then the increase is in electricity. So that means that we expect that the most cost-effective way will be to have a lot of heat produced by large electric heat pumps. And some of it will, and also boiling surplus electricity. When we have a situation that is produced so much, for instance, wind electricity, that it even costs something to get rid of it, instead of destroying the system. So instead of that, we could boil water, and that could then be used for heat supply. So on transportation, this is a picture from Oslo, where you know there is a huge number of electric cars. And what we think we will have to do is to look at this, which demonstrates the expected growth in passenger kilometers and ton kilometers. And again, our analysis show us that if we should achieve the carbon reduction targets in the most cost-effective way, then we need to make a very serious effort in transportation, both in passenger and in freight. And how to achieve that comes here. When we are talking of cars and light commercial vehicles in the carbon neutral scenario, we believe in electricity. This is the situation in 2015. Less than 1% of the total car park, light commercial vehicles park, is electric. And that picture should change to 2050, where 66% should be electric and 24% hybrids, and only 11% left to traditional combustion engines. On long-distance transportation, and that means transportation in air, long-distance transportation at sea and on the roads. We don't think, we think it is too optimistic to hope for that battery or other storage facilities have been developed in that way that we can rely on electricity for that kind of transportation. So therefore, we expect that that will have to be covered by biofuels. And if that is the case, then if we look at the resources of biomass in the Nordic countries, we expect that that will lead to an import dependency on 15% for biomass in 2050, up from 8% in 2013. Where will that import come from? Probably some of it coming from the Baltic countries, if there's a surplus in these countries. But I have to say, we have also discussed that today, that one of our research projects called Enerwoods demonstrates that it is possible to increase the production of biomass in Nordic forestry with 100% in 2050. Without requiring big investments, it requires that we are dealing with the forests in another way than we are doing today. So that is certainly a possibility to increase the production. And then again, the question is, of course, as we have heard today, how do we want to use the biomass from the forest? Is it for energy purposes, or is it for producing vitamins, or whatever it is, of a higher value? Industry, this is an oil refinery in Norway, and industry is pictured here. And you can see some of these spots which are demonstrating where the carbon emissions come from will disappear. Because, for instance, the most of them in Denmark, because they are coming from fossil fuel-fired power plants. And they will be phased out in the course of the next 10-15 years, the same I think in Finland. But then there are other industrial CO2 emissions, and they are coming from, for instance, aluminium melting in Iceland, on iron and steel in Norway and in Finland. And here we have the specific problem that some of the emissions coming from that kind of industry are so-called process emissions, which means that even if the fuel you use is 100% clean, then the process in itself, melting of iron, melting of aluminium, producing cement, that releases CO2. And that is why we believe that it might be necessary to have some industrial carbon capture and storage in order to achieve the last missing percents in this road from 100% to 85% in 2050. And everybody knows, we also know that this has not been very successful yet. But we and other organizations consider it to, in one way or another, to be necessary to find solutions on having carbon capture and storage in an economically feasible way. On buildings, we expect that although we have had an annual improvement in 0.8%, we need to have a strongly increased annual improvement on 2.2% in order to achieve the most cost-effective carbon-neutral scenario. So this is, of course, also a serious challenge to do that. It will require a heavy effort in existing buildings, because the age of the building stock is, as we have talked about this morning, high, and therefore it is not sufficient only to deal with new buildings. So, in conclusion, our advice to the policymakers and to decision makers in industry is that if we should achieve the so-called carbon neutrality, the 85% reduction in 2050, then we need to continue the efforts you have already seen in the electricity system and in the heating system to have an even more interconnected and flexible energy system, and that can help us to solve the problems in relation to electricity and heat. The second one is that also in the Nordic areas there is an increasing urbanization, and that means that an increasing part of the greenhouse gas emissions will come from cities, and in the cities it is easier to find carbon-free transportation and carbon-free buildings than if you look at rural areas. So therefore, as far as we can see, and the International Energy Agency in Paris share these considerations, it's very important to find a way to cooperate with all the important initiatives in cities on how we can reduce carbon emissions from transport and buildings. And last but not least, to ramp up the decarbonization of long-distance transport and industry. Here we cannot really rely on that electricity can solve all the problems. And in long-distance transportation, biofuels, in industry probably also carbon capture and storage. And that will, to succeed in that, that will require more research, development, and dissemination of new technologies. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Any questions?
So with space heating, increase 0.8% per year or even 2.2% per year. This is
decreases. It should decrease.
Decrease. Yes, yes. When it's logical. I think it's annual improvement.
Yeah, annual improvement. That
is
means
a decrease.
That's a decrease. Yes.
Yeah. Because this, I think it is already decreasing.
It is
in most of countries.
It is, and you can see it has decreased in average 0.8%.
Yes,
and that is, I mean, that is a rather significant decrease.
Yeah.
So this 2.2%, this is a very ambitious target, but we consider it doable, and we consider it to do it in buildings is among the most cost-effective tools to achieve our reductions.
That doesn't look very challenging because it's.
You don't think so? I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, I think it's many countries already are doing better than this 2% per year.
Yeah.
Because of all of these renovation, it's when they save easily 50% of the space heating, because space heating is basically the easiest one what you can save. It is much more challenging to save electricity in buildings.
Yeah.
That's something indeed.
But this is both covering space heating and other electricity utilization in buildings. So this is space heating.
Space, yes.
But the other thing I would say is that you should take into account that the Nordic countries have already. It might be that this doesn't sound as impressive, but already before 1990, a lot was done in Nordic buildings to reduce space heating. So
sure,
I think from our point of departure, I'm only happy if it is not very challenging.
For Baltic this is not challenging at all.
There's one more number that gives some more information on this, and that's basically that we expect a doubling of the energy savings related investments is needed. So for every dollar you use on saving energy, in the future you have to double that amount. And still that is the most economical thing to do in order to save energy.
Yeah, this is cheap in buildings. I fully agree. It's much cheaper than building a new power plants. It's when you compare how much you can achieve with $1.
Paul?
Yeah. On the slide where you showed your vision for energy connections in 2050, I believe it was. The buildings in Latvia were much less visible than for the other two Baltic countries, or was it?
There's a very thin line.
A very thin line.
Yeah.
Yeah. How is that? It's just.
I must admit that I don't know the explanation of that.
No, it is actually the lines. The thickness of the lines indicate the volumes of energy transported. So it is. This is actually an estimate that there will be hardly any.
Okay.
And what is the reason for that?
Yeah. This modeling exercise actually play around with figures in order what's less expensive to do, what will happen first, based on very sophisticated set of various prognosis tools.
But it could be what the minister told us, that Latvia has a very high contribution already from renewable energy, and that in contrast to this Lithuania, where the minister underlines that they would be much more interested in trades in buying electricity than producing it itself. Latvia was one of the countries that had the highest contribution of domestic produced electricity in the European Union before the targets for 2020 were set. So that could be the reason.
Yeah, and then also the electricity price in Latvia will be lower. So it won't be such an attractive market to go into.
Yes, Mr. Director.
Does include your analysis forecast for electricity prices, which is important for Lithuania having these interconnections and going to so complicated interconnections, a lot of interconnections. Do you have this forecast for electricity prices?
Yes, we have. Yes, I wouldn't call it a forecast because it is a scenario, and who can forecast prices on energy, etc. But yes, the model is operating with this increasing level of interconnections, and the model is operating. The result of the modeling work is that we expect that there will be increased electricity prices all over Europe, and these links between the Nordic area and the continental area could lead to increased electricity prices in the Nordic area compared to where they are now. But that is more a reflection of that everybody expects that the electricity prices will be higher all over, including in continental Europe. Also, because what the modeling also expects is that there will be that we will need at some stage to have a carbon taxation which works, which we don't have today. We have an EU carbon taxation system that doesn't work, but we expect that if the world and the European Union should achieve the ambitious targets, we need to have an effective carbon price, and that is built into the models, and that is one of the reasons. So in a way you can say it is not due to more trade that we will have higher prices. If we will have higher prices, it is actually more due to that there will be a kind of carbon taxation all over. Yeah.
I just want you to reflect a bit on the point about either being a net exporter of electricity or actually using the electricity to create wealth and workplaces, because that is a dilemma here, and also pointed out by the minister and on the look on biofuels.
Yeah. Yes.
How do you balance that?
So let us look at it completely down to earth. In Denmark, my country Denmark, you know, we have built very much wind turbines. In this scenario, we expect that something like 30% of the entire electricity, 30, will come from wind in 2050. We expect that Denmark will be something like 70% of electricity coming from wind. The heavy investments in domestically produced energy and energy efficiency has led to heavy investments, but also the growing up of a new industry where wind turbines are being produced, insulation for pipes, and a lot of other energy technology equipment. That is now covering something like 15% of the entire Danish industry. Denmark, of the entire Danish export. Denmark is well known for exporting pork and other agricultural products. The export of energy equipment is now more important than that export. So that has been a benefit for Denmark. As far as the Nordic countries, it is probably a little more difficult to point out. I think it is more relevant to compare Denmark with Lithuania than the other countries, because the other countries have the benefit of having hydropower. A lot of hydropower in Norway. Sweden has for many years had 50% of it from hydropower, and also in Finland there is hydropower. In Denmark there's absolutely no hydropower, and nevertheless it has been considered to be an socio-economic benefit for Denmark, instead of saying let us import cheap electricity, and the electricity is very cheap for the time being. It has been a socio-economic benefit to invest in wind, in energy efficiency, and the other things we have invested into. Yeah.
I have a question regarding the price areas. Do you expect for 2015 the same composition of a price area?
In 2000,
especially, for example, for the Norways. I know you have on the north of Norway, you have a plan and the power system development.
No, I say again, how the price, how the division of the price areas will be in 35 years from now is impossible to predict. But I don't think we will count on that. We'll count on that. For instance, these developments will lead to more uniform prices in the Nordic area. Yes.
53 terawatt hours surplus in 2050 here on the map here. It is the result that you need assistance from neighbors to balance the system, because a lot of intermittent generation, or how that figure, that 53 terawatt hours net export from Nordic countries. It's intentionally you want to be the exporter of this region, or it is a result because it's necessary to export because this necessity to balance. So
I would see a combination. It is necessary in order to balance. It is a benefit to have all these links to neighboring countries. That will inevitably result in more trade with the countries. It will also, this fact and the fact about the carbon taxation will lead to higher prices in the Nordic area. That will lead to more generation capacity, because today it is a fact that, for instance, along the Norwegian coast, there is a huge potential for producing wind by wind turbines. And just at one example, there was an idea to have a wind turbine park close to Trondheim. That was very close to not be realized, 1,000 megawatts, very close to not be realized, because the electricity prices were simply too low to secure a certainty for payback. So this is a very big privilege to have such a problem, that the electricity prices are so low that you are not tempted to, and at the same time have sufficient capacity. So again, a result of that, there will probably be more incentives to use some of this huge untapped potential for more electricity produced by wind. And that will, according to our models, lead to this possibility for net export, created by increased production and by easy access to the export markets.
Just one addition to this question. Yeah. Nordic countries are blessed with strong winds. Yeah, you don't have much of sun, but it's windy, very windy region. It's maybe windiest.
No.
But in maybe UK in better conditions.
Norway is very windy.
Yeah.
Denmark is not much more windy than.
But in any case, it's more windy than the east coast of Baltic Sea. That's.
I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
No, I'm not sure.
When you travel along the Jutland western coast, all trees, all branches just in one direction, because it's so strong winds and no branches in the west direction, only to the east.
But there are windmills all over the country.
Yeah. But this cooperation of Nordic and Baltic countries, or even more including Poland and North Germany. It's looking from this European Energy Union point of view that it looks that Nordic countries more suitable for generation and to be the producer of electricity to other regions because they are in more favorable geographical meteorological conditions.
Let us compare with one other country, Greece. In Greece, they are benefit with a permanent breeze in Greece, and they are not really utilizing it. So again, I don't think you can make the point that on wind, that Denmark, for instance, is in a better position than, let us say, France, along western coast, United Kingdom, you mentioned that yourself, very favorable conditions, Spain, Portugal, favorable conditions for wind. But you're right in that way that the presence of huge amounts of hydropower, that is a gift to the Nordic countries, because that helps us, that has already helped us and can help us in the future to balance for intermittent variable production from wind or solar if that becomes important.
A bit more one comment. Having 53 terawatt hours over capacity in this region, our possibility to supply. Looking from Lithuanian point of view, where our annual consumption only 11 terawatt hours. And
buy it from us.
We must import as long as possible because it's cheapest way to supply electricity because we don't have any our natural fuels is excluded in 2050 fossil fuels. But winds are stronger. It means electricity produced in Norway will be cheaper, always cheaper than in Lithuania. And if you have a lot of strong interconnectors due to this necessity to balance, why not to use that?
I mean, that is one of the reasons why I suggest that we might, that the Baltic countries might benefit from making a similar study here, because I do not know the Baltic countries sufficiently well to respond directly to your question. But I'm not convinced at all that it could, I believe it could have an important and useful payback also to build wind turbines and more biomass facilities, bioenergy facilities in the Baltic countries. But that is exactly why we have made this study, to try to investigate what would be the most cost effective for the Nordic area. And my idea is to make a similar study in the Baltic countries. How much of that you could benefit from cooperation with the Nordic countries, between the Baltic countries, and how much of it would be a benefit to produce yourself, and how much would be cheaper to import.
A good topic for next study.
Yes.
Yes, as I see in 1950, electricity goes to Lithuania to both directions, to Lithuania and from Lithuania.
That is what we are expecting. You can see it is a little thicker one way than the other way, but still we expect some imports there. But Ben, Sven, yes, I think you would say something.
Yeah, just to explain the net export. There's an underlying assumption that there is a solid carbon price, which has taken out some of the generation capacity in Europe. So that
was the carbon taxation we talked about before.
Exactly. So that
must be. It's inevitable.
Yeah. So that's an underlying assumption in order to get that high number.
More questions? Thank you for the questions. That was very interesting. Thank you. Thank you.